Hey, welcome back to SteynPost. I've been asked why I haven't had more to say about last week's terror attack at the Palace of Westminster in London. And to be honest, the reason is a glum one. I haven't got anything to say that I haven't said before about Berlin, about Nice, about Brussels, about Paris, about Orlando, about San Bernardino. I haven't really got anything to say that I haven't said going all the way back to Beslan and Bali and 9/11 at the dawn of the century. What is there more to say? In the end, they're all the same, and the only difference is in the human victims of this ongoing slaughter, of this ongoing civilizational struggle, as some of us see it. This time, the carnage took place on Westminster Bridge. I mentioned on the radio that I did a photo shoot on Westminster Bridge last year, and I was there on one side, leaning against the rail, and they'd cleared a little space around me, so I was looking across the opposite side of the bridge where all the tourists were streaming across. And it occurred to me, because it wasn't long after Nice, that this would be a very easy place to pull off one of these vehicle attacks that are now all the rage among the guys who are trying to kill us. Because there's nowhere to go. All you can do is hurl yourself into the Thames. There's no doorways, there's no shops to duck into. And so it proved for the victims on that bridge. They included Aisha Fraid, a young mother who was walking across the bridge to pick up her children from school. They included Kurt Cochran, an American in London who'd taken his wife there to celebrate their silver wedding anniversary, and he was thrown off the bridge and landed on one of those little concrete footings that are way down near the level of the River Thames. A horrible way to die. His wife is still in hospital, badly injured. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, and it was, but not in a way that anyone will ever celebrate. And every anniversary from now till the day she dies, she will have not just her future stolen from her, the future with her husband, but her past too, tainted by the memory of how this murderous thug took the great love of her life. And then there was, and the symmetry of this is almost too absurd, Leslie Rhodes, a 75-year-old Londoner. He used to clean the windows at Chartwell, which is Winston Churchill's country house. And that is the journey that the United Kingdom has taken in the years since the Second World War. From Churchill saying that if the British Empire lasts 1,000 years, men shall still say this was its finest hour in the Battle of Britain. To a Britain where the battle being waged is an internal one, in this case against people actually born British subjects, people who in law have never been anything other than British, people who have all the paperwork of being British, but they lack the one essential thing, which is the definition of citizenship, and that is allegiance. And Khalid Massoud's allegiance lay elsewhere. The fourth victim of this terror attack was Police Constable Keith Palmer, who was unarmed, and he was stabbed outside while guarding the Houses of Parliament. I'll have a bit more to say about that a little later. Citizens of 11 countries were among the injured. As I said, it's a big tourist route, Westminster Bridge. So all the stories are the same. Berlin, Nice, Brussels, Orlando, whatever. But they're different in the human lives they take, in the human cost, in the people affected by it, the people who will be living with these crippling injuries until the day they die, the people who have had loved ones lost, stolen from them, taken from them, That is the only difference. Otherwise, these things are all the same, including our reactions. But there was one particular, not exactly a reaction, but a symmetrical event, a mere 24 hours later, that I want to talk about. So this today is a tale of two Houses of Commons. The original House of Commons in England, the mother of parliaments, and the attack on Wednesday. And then what happened a day later at a sister House of Commons, the House of Commons in Ottawa, founded in the mother country's image 150 years ago this year. And 24 hours after this terrorist attack in the mother of parliaments, one of the many younger parliaments that England has bequeathed across the planet, the House of Commons in Ottawa voted to pass Resolution M103 on eliminating Islamophobia. This was a private member's motion by a Canadian MP called Iqra Khalid. That's to say her surname is the same as the forename of the guy who perpetrated the attack in London, Khalid Massoud. And Iqra Khalid's motion read that in the opinion of the House, the government should A, recognise the need to quell the increasing public climate of hate and fear. And then she said B, what was B here? Oh yeah, condemn Islamophobia, a term that nobody in the Canadian Parliament, a legislature makes laws. There is no legal definition of Islamophobia, yet it didn't prevent the House of Commons in Canada from passing this motion on so-called eliminating Islamophobia. And the fact that 24 hours earlier there had been an Islamic terrorist attack on Canada's sister parliament in the United Kingdom didn't deter Iqra Khalid from going ahead with her motion, or, to their shame, a majority of Canadian members in supporting it. The Canadian Parliament should not be in the business of these kinds of resolutions, not at all. Let's just go back to that first sentence, reading from the top, that in the opinion of the House, the government should A, recognise the need to quell the increasing public climate of hate and fear. Hate and fear are emotions, and in free societies, legislatures do not attempt to legislate human emotions. We've seen all that in movies, in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is a masterpiece of its kind, which is about what happens when you strip humanity of its emotions. Not just the nice ones, the fluffy ones like love and sympathy, but the bad ones. Hate and fear. Hate and fear are part of what it means to be human. So even without mentioning Islamophobia, I don't like this motion and I would have voted against it. And there are times when fear is legitimate too. If you are a Jew in the French city of Toulouse, where Jewish life can now only proceed under armed guard, where you cannot wear identifying marks of your faith, because certain persons of a particular faith tradition, I don't want to get any more specific because I don't want to be accused of Islamophobia this early on, but certain persons have made it very uncomfortable for Jews in Toulouse. There have been attacks on synagogues. So your fear, a public climate of fear, if you happen to be a Jew in Toulouse, is very justified. If you're a woman in the square in front of Cologne Cathedral on New Year's Eve, your fear is justified. If you're a gay guy walking home from a nightclub in Amsterdam, formerly the most tolerant city in Europe, your fear of walking those streets and the young men of a particular faith tradition that you might encounter, your fear is justified. As for hate, what is the main source of open hate in Canadian life today? Is it the imam who said in Montreal, he gave a sermon on the obligation to kill all Jews? Well, you know, he was a guy visiting from Jordan, a Jordanian imam, usual illiterate buffoon, and perhaps he's not typical of Canadian imams. Okay, well, what about this guy, Waim al-Gitawi, who is an actual Montreal imam, and is talking about female subservience to men. By Allah, if a husband has a boil oozing pus anywhere from head to toe, the wife will not be doing him full justice even if she licks it clean. This is what an imam in Montreal is preaching in the year 2017. So if you're a woman and you don't feel like licking clean the pus-oozing boil on your husband's butt, maybe you have a legitimate fear. You might hate sucking a pus-oozing boil. You might have a legitimate fear of what your husband might say if you say to him, well, darling, if you don't mind, I'd just as soon rather not suck the pus-oozing boil off your butt tonight. But it would apparently, that kind of hatred, that kind of fear that is being preached in mosques, not in Yemen, not in Waziristan, but in mosques all across Canada, that kind of public climate of hate is of no interest to the House of Commons in Canada. Iqra Khalid said this. This is how tone deaf Ms. Khalid was last week. I think that we need to continue to build those bridges amongst Canadians, and this is just one way that we can do this, Iqra Khalid said after winning the vote in Parliament. You know, she wants to build bridges. And she's talking about building bridges the day after an attack on one of the most famous bridges in the world, on Westminster Bridge, where one of her co-religionists, he doesn't want to build bridges, he wants to kill people on the bridges. He wants to mow them down on the bridge. There's a big difference between people who use language metaphorically and people who use it literally. And I've become more aware of that in the years since 9/11. When liberals and progressives talk about building bridges, they don't mean building bridges. They wouldn't know how to build a bridge. They don't do anything. It's just one of those sappy, soppy, meaningless, feel-good phrases. Building bridges means some just kind of vague general outreach. Khalid Massoud took it literally. He wanted to kill people on a bridge. And as I said, there's a big difference between a culture in which language has become stripped of literal meaning and it's increasingly metaphorical, and then what we see amongst our enemies, where they take it very literally. And I've been thinking about this a long time, and I think it was back in 2004 when my colleague at the Chicago Sun-Times, Bob Novak, Bob was quoting a senior official from one of America's coalition allies who was calling for Donald Rumsfeld, who was then the defense secretary, to be fired on the grounds that, quote, there must be a neck cut and there is only one neck of choice. Now, he didn't mean that he wanted to literally slice Donald Rumsfeld's head off. He was using it metaphorically. But again, he was so tone deaf that at that exact moment in Iraq, an American hostage, Nick Berg, was literally having his head sawed off while the madmen around him were raving Allahu Akbar. And that is the difference in this civilizational struggle between men who mean what they say and a culture in which we have stripped language of meaning and turned everything into the same blurry, woozy, metaphoric meaninglessness. Now, when I say that these men don't speak metaphorically, they do, on the other hand, understand symbolism. And they're very clear about the symbolic power of what they did. It's not an accident that they targeted the Palace of Westminster. Westminster is not just a place, It gave a name to an entire citizen system of government, practiced all over the country, all over the planet, practiced not just in Canada, but in Australia and in Jamaica and in Papua New Guinea and in India and across the planet, the Westminster system. He crossed Westminster Bridge. On one side of the bridge is Lambeth Palace, where the Archbishop of Canterbury sits as head not only of the Church of England, but of the worldwide Anglican Communion. And he crossed over to Parliament Square, where the Houses of Parliament sit, but also Westminster Abbey. He understood the symbolism of his target. Just as the Islamic terrorist who murdered a Canadian soldier from the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders at Canada's War Memorial, the Cenotaph in Ottawa, and then rampaged through the Canadian Parliament, understood the symbolism of what he was doing too. They understand symbolism, our enemies, and we don't. We shrug these things off very easily. And what the Canadian Parliament, the Canadian House of Commons, should have stood in solidarity with its brethren in the British House of Commons rather than passing this stupid motion. I want to talk about, again, one of the most disquieting impacts of this resolution. People say, well, a resolution, it's not a law. I fought a long, hard struggle in Canada to get an outrageous hate speech law repealed, and it was eventually repealed a couple of years ago, Section 13. So I'm not happy to see this resolution come back as kind of Section 13 coming back on the sly with its prohibitions against Islamophobia. And people say, oh, well, it's not just a resolution, it's not a law, what are you on about? Where's the harm? Where's the harm in this? Well, first, a lot of resolutions in Canada are treated with the force of law. At the end of the First World War, the same House of Commons passed the Nickel Resolution asking King George V not to hand out any more knighthoods and peerages to Canadians. And that's waxed and waned over the years. But Jean Chrétien, when he was Prime Minister, accorded it the force of law, which was why he denied a peerage to my old boss Conrad Black, which via various other convolutions is one reason why he wound up sitting in jail in an American prison in Miami. Jean Chrétien chose to treat the Nickel Resolution, which was just like a recommendation to a king who's been dead for 80 years, as having the ongoing force of law. And that's how it's going to go with M103. That eventually it will become assumed to have the force of law. Even before it was even voted on, people were scared of it. I interviewed several Canadian Conservative Party leadership candidates, among them Kelly Leitch, Maxime Bernier, and Lisa Raitt, and I liked them all. And as I say on this weekend's Mark Steyn show, I don't mind differences on policy. But I absolutely draw the line on the issue of free speech, because free speech makes it impossible to have an argument about policy. If you're in favour of restricting free speech, eventually you render policy discussions impossible. Because free speech is the condition which enables you to have all the other arguments about all the other policies. And to her shame, Lisa Raitt, one of those I interviewed, a very nice lady, on Thursday declined to be present in the House of Commons. So she neither voted for the motion and she neither voted against it, because she had calculated in that finger in the windiness to which so many squishy Western politicians are prone, that she couldn't afford to anger the Conservative Party base by voting against it, but on the other hand, she didn't want to be painted as an Islamophobe by not voting for it. So she stayed away. She stayed away. And that tells you how weak-willed people and finger in the windiness is a serious condition in Canada, coast to coast, that tells you that even before the motion is passed, people are willing to silence themselves in order not to be seen as, quote, so-called Islamophobic. That's the danger of motions like these. We already live in a cowardly age. I was struck by the nuttiness of the reaction to this terrorist attack in the UK. My old colleagues at The Spectator, James Forsyth, wrote a piece, 3 things we should do to help tackle the Islamist terror threat. They all make sense. He's calling on people to jail, the government to jail ISIS members because this guy was known. But it takes 12 people to monitor someone who is on a surveillance list. So you work out the enforcement costs of that. If we're monitoring everyone who catches the state's eye, 12 people, you're going to have a huge uptick in all the other crimes, like property crime and rape and everything, because they're going to go entirely unpoliced, because people are going to be devoting all their resources, 12 people per person, millions and millions of dollars to monitoring each person who requires surveillance. And eventually it will bankrupt the state. So he says, throw ISIS members in jail. Do you think any English judge is going to do that? The definition of treason is giving aid and comfort to the Queen's enemies. These guys aren't giving aid and comfort to the Queen's enemies. They are the Queen's enemies. They've taken the opposing side in a war in which British troops are participating. And yet we can't put them in jail. We give them a slap of the wrist and then send them to anti-violent extremism school for a couple of months. Because that's how wedded we are now to multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is so deeply ingrained that it even gives you the right to choose which side of the war you want to be on. Do you want to be on the home team or do you want to be on the enemy's team? Multiculturalism is fine by that. His second proposal from The Spectator, cracking down on social media. Do you think that's going to go anywhere? Do you think Facebook will, and YouTube and all these people, they'll throw somebody off if he happens to be a bit too right-wing or whatever, but do you think they're seriously going to crack down after parliaments are passing motions about how Islamophobia is the biggest danger of all? No. And then he says, and this brings us back to poor P.C. Palmer, an unarmed policeman guarding the Houses of Commons and who was stabbed to death. He says we need more armed police. The British police are unarmed because they historically have never needed to be armed, not since Sir Robert Peel founded modern policing almost 2 centuries ago. Peel was concerned that he didn't want these people looking like an internal soldiery. That's why they didn't wear red, British Army red at the time. That's why they wore blue. And likewise, that's why they didn't have guns. If you see, you can look at old British movies, the film that introduced The Blue Lamp, I think it's called, that introduced Dixon of Dock Green, big perennial on British TV in the 1950s. And right at the end of the film, the police decide they need pistols to take down the ne'er-do-well. And they have to go and knock on doors and borrow pistols from the citizenry in order to have any guns to use against the criminal gang. And what James Forsyth in The Spectator is arguing, that we now have to get used to armed police on the streets of the United Kingdom. That the once peaceable land now has to be controlled by armed police. Now, we could do all these things. The British could do all these things. Canada could do all these things. Wouldn't it be easier, though, to recognize that instead of attempting to change every aspect of life, that, say, certain changes in immigration policy might be more useful? That, in fact, certain restrictions on the ability of hate-filled imams to come and preach in Montreal mosques might be more useful. Wouldn't it be worth trying that? Oh, don't go there. You might be in breach of M103, the anti-Islamophobia motion. Sounds a wee bit Islamophobic. We need to be able to live in truth. And we need to be able to discuss the issue of Islam and the West honestly. And insofar as M103 makes it harder and more complicated to discuss it honestly, it is a wicked motion of which those members of Parliament should be ashamed. We have enough lies. This is from Mark Rowley, the acting Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police and the big counter-terrorism guy. And his reaction to Khalid Massoud killing British Americans, severely wounding citizens of 11 other countries on Westminster Bridge is to say, quote, "We must recognise now that our Muslim communities will feel anxious at this time given the past behaviour of the extreme right wing, and we will continue to work with all community leaders in the coming days." So I would like to ask Deputy Commissioner, what extreme right wing are you talking about? What extreme right wing guy has mown down pedestrians on Westminster Bridge? What extreme right wing guy has stabbed a policeman outside the House of Commons? Mark Rowley has taken Resolution M103 to the next step. He recognises that honesty about Islam is not possible, so that even murderous Islamic assaults are important only so far as they might lead to hypothetical, entirely hypothetical, extreme right-wing attacks. And that is the danger, that eventually everyone digests the official lie that Resolution M103 is asking us to sign on to. My friend Douglas Murray put it this way: "History suggests that when the law makes it illegal to tell the truth, a reliable portion of people can be called upon to lie. So it has been in the past, and so it will be with Canada. So it would be anywhere once the law became an opponent of truth rather than the protector of it." Deputy Commissioner Mark Rowley, supposed to secure the lives of the citizens of London, and who represents the force of law, is already an opponent of truth. And too many people wish to do what Lisa Raitt did: sit out the choices, not show up. Sometimes you have to show up. This resolution should have been massively defeated. We are in an ideological struggle. And it's not one you fight by arming hitherto unarmed policemen, by putting more bollards up along every sidewalk throughout the Western world so that cars can't ride up to them. It's not one you do by clamping down on social media and regulating speech. It's a battle that can only be won by truthfully, honestly addressing the root causes of the struggle we face. Shame on my country's parliament for taking action which will ensure that we all take refuge in the official lies as our civilization withers. See you next time.